John woke up in a cold, unfamiliar place. His head throbbed, and his body felt weak. He blinked several times, trying to adjust to the dim light that seemed to come from nowhere. The air was thick, metallic, and smelled of something strange. There were no windows, no doors, just smooth, dark walls that stretched endlessly in every direction. The only sound he could hear was his own breath, shallow and uneven. Panic started to rise in him. Where am I? How did I get here? His mind raced, trying to piece together any clue, but nothing came. He stood up, his legs unsteady, and tried to make sense of the place. The walls seemed to pulse faintly, as if alive. He took a few steps forward, but the ground beneath him was unyielding, cold, and hard. Suddenly, a voice broke through the silence. It was deep and resonated in the very core of his body. "Human, you are now mine. You will serve me for the rest of your life." John froze. The voice was coming from everywhere, yet from nowhere. It felt like the walls themselves were speaking. He spun around, his heart racing, searching for the source of the voice, but there was no one in sight. Was it a dream? A nightmare? But no, this felt too real. His hands trembled as he tried to gather his thoughts, to focus. Who was this? What did it want from him? "Who are you?" John called out, his voice shaky, unsure. His question echoed back to him, but there was no response. The silence grew heavier, suffocating him. Then, out of nowhere, a shape began to materialize in the center of the room. At first it was just a dark shadow, but it quickly solidified into a towering figure. It was tall, far taller than any human. Its skin was dark, almost black, and its eyes glowed a brilliant, unsettling blue. The creature didn't move, but John could feel its presence like a weight on his chest. "I am Synax," the voice boomed again. "And you, human, are now my servant." John took a step back, his heart pounding. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't some figment of his imagination. This creature, Synax, was real. And it was holding him captive. The fear that coursed through his body was suffocating. What did it want from him? Why was he here? Before he could gather his thoughts, Synax spoke again, its voice filled with cold promise. "Escape is impossible. You are mine, now and forever." John's heart raced as he stared at the towering figure of Synax. His mind struggled to comprehend what was happening. The creature's glowing blue eyes seemed to pierce right through him, reading his every thought, every fear. He was helpless, trapped in this strange, cold place with no way out. "I won't serve you," John said, trying to steady his voice. He didn't know why he said it. Perhaps it was an act of defiance, or just a desperate attempt to regain some control. But Synax didn't respond with anger, only with a chilling calmness that made the fear grow even deeper inside him. Without a single movement, Synax raised a hand. The room seemed to shift instantly, as if the very walls were alive. The cold, metallic surface of the walls twisted and began to melt like wax, dripping to the ground in slow, liquid-like streams. John stumbled backward, his breath catching in his throat. This was no ordinary creature. This was something far beyond anything he had ever known. Synax spoke again, its voice echoing in every corner of the room. "You cannot escape, human. This place is mine, and I control everything within it." The walls, now soft and flowing, curled and reformed into strange shapes, creating new barriers around John. The liquid metal reformed into towering spikes, trapping him in the center of the room. His every move was restricted. The temperature began to drop rapidly, and ice began to form along the new walls, creeping toward him. John shivered, his mind racing. He had to do something. He had to get out. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't even move. It was as if the very air was holding him in place, freezing his muscles. He felt small and powerless. Synax's glowing eyes never left him, and the creature's voice came again, calm but commanding. "You will learn soon enough. Resistance is futile." I am a being of unimaginable power, and you are nothing but a human. Weak, fragile, easily controlled. With a flick of Synax's hand, the spikes retracted, and the ice melted away, leaving the room as cold and silent as it had been before. John was left standing in the center, shivering, his heart racing, but no longer trapped. "This is only the beginning," Synax said, its voice filling the space around him. "You will serve me, human, whether you want to or not." John swallowed hard. What was he supposed to do against something like this? The fear that gripped him was unlike anything he had ever felt before. Synax wasn't just powerful, it was like a god. And John was nothing. John stood frozen, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. Synax's words echoed in his head, each syllable weighing heavily on his heart. Eternal life, power, wealth beyond imagination. The offer seemed almost too good to be true, and yet the creature's cold, glowing eyes and the overwhelming presence of its power made it impossible to dismiss. Synax took a step closer, its towering form casting a shadow over John. "I will offer you everything, human. Power that you cannot even fathom. Wealth that will make kings bow before you. Eternal life, free from the limits of time. Imagine a life where nothing can harm you, where you never have to fear death, where all your desires are within your reach." The words were seductive, the promises too grand to ignore. John's pulse quickened as the idea of immortality crept into his mind. No more aging, no more sickness, no more fear of the unknown. He could have it all, everything he ever wanted. Was it worth it? "And what do you want in return?" John asked, though the question tasted bitter on his tongue. Could he really believe this creature? Could he trust it? Synax's gaze turned colder, its voice quieter but more menacing. "I want nothing more than your loyalty, human. Serve me, and you will have everything. Disobey me, and you will face the consequences. You will cease to exist, erased from this reality, as if you were never born. You will be nothing." The words hit John like a punch to the gut. The creature's power was undeniable. It had already shown him what it could do: reshape reality, control the environment with a thought. He was nothing compared to Synax. "You are mine, now and forever," Synax continued, its voice now a soft but undeniable command. "Join me, and you will be a part of something greater than you can imagine. We will conquer galaxies together. You will become one of the most powerful beings in existence. No more limits, no more pain." John's mind raced as he weighed the offer. The chance for power, immortality, and freedom from the burdens of human life. It was tempting, but at what cost? To serve this creature, to be bound to it for eternity. Was it worth sacrificing his freedom for eternal life? "Think carefully, human," Synax said, reading his hesitation. "This is the only offer you will get. There are no second chances. Choose wisely." John took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. The offer was everything he could ever want, yet everything he feared. To serve this being would mean giving up who he was, his very identity. But could he afford to refuse, knowing the creature's power? The silence stretched on, suffocating him. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "And if I refuse?" Synax smiled, a cold, twisted smile. "Then you will learn that there are consequences for defying me. I do not take rejection lightly." The air in the room grew colder as Synax's words hung in the silence. John's heart was pounding in his chest, and his mind raced as he tried to process everything. The offer, immortality, power, freedom from the limits of being human, was tempting beyond belief, but something deep inside him resisted. Could he truly serve this creature? Could he live forever, bound to it? "You cannot escape, human," Synax's voice echoed, almost as if reading John's thoughts. "This is your only chance. Choose wisely, for there is no turning back." John's mind was a battleground. Every part of him screamed to refuse, to find another way out. But the fear of what Synax could do to him if he said no was enough to freeze him in place. The creature had already shown him its power. He was nothing in comparison. But still, he couldn't bring himself to agree. "I will never serve you," John muttered, though the words felt weak, unsure. Synax's expression remained unchanged, but a flicker of frustration passed through its eyes. "You are foolish to resist. You have no power here. You are weak. But I will give you a chance, human. A test. Let's see if you truly have what it takes to defy me." John felt a cold shiver run down his spine. What kind of test was this creature talking about? He barely had any strength left after just a few minutes in this strange, alien world. He was trapped, hopeless, and yet Synax was offering him a chance to prove something. Without warning, Synax extended a hand toward John. A flash of blue energy shot from the creature's fingers, striking the air around John, making the ground tremble beneath his feet. The very room seemed to come alive, shifting, swirling in a vortex of lights and shadows. John stumbled backward, his eyes wide with panic. "What is this?" he shouted, his voice barely audible over the sound of the shifting environment. Synax's cold laugh echoed through the room. "You will face your fear, human. You will confront the very thing that makes you weak. And when you do, you will understand your place in this world, my world." Suddenly, the air grew thick and heavy. The walls seemed to close in, the space shrinking around him. John could feel a presence, something dark and horrifying, something that chilled him to his very core. His breath became shallow as his surroundings twisted and changed, revealing a dark, shadowy figure moving toward him. "This is your test," Synax's voice boomed, almost like a distant thunder. "Face it, or you will never leave this place. Only if you survive this trial will I even consider granting you the power you desire." John's eyes locked onto the creature in front of him, and he felt his entire body tremble in fear. The shadowy figure grew larger with every passing second, and John knew deep down that it wasn't just a manifestation of his fear. It was something real, something dangerous. The same creature that Synax had promised he would become. "You will not win, human," Synax whispered, his voice somehow soothing and chilling at the same time. "But you may learn something along the way." John swallowed hard. There was no way out of this. He had to face whatever this was. If he didn't, if he failed this test, he knew Synax's wrath would be worse than anything he could imagine. With a deep breath, he stepped forward, ready to face his fear head-on. John's legs felt weak beneath him, but he forced himself to stand tall, his eyes locked on the approaching figure. The darkness around him seemed to pulse, alive with energy. It felt as though the very air itself was pressing in on him, suffocating him, as the shadowy figure grew larger with each passing moment. His heart pounded in his chest, and his thoughts raced. What was this? The trial Synax spoke of had begun. The creature had promised that only if he faced his fear would he gain any chance of survival. But what was this fear? Was it the darkness, the creature itself, or something far more personal, buried deep within his soul? The figure loomed closer now, its form taking shape. It was a tall, shadowy figure, its features obscured by darkness, but its presence was overwhelming. It felt like something ancient and unstoppable, something that could crush him with a single thought. John's breath became shallow, panic rising in his chest. The shadows around him seemed to whisper, crawling closer, wrapping around him like chains. He took a step back, but the darkness followed. No, he couldn't back down. Not now. His mind flickered to his past, his fears, his failures, everything that had ever haunted him. It was like the shadows were feeding on those memories, twisting them into monstrous forms, showing him his deepest insecurities and regrets. He saw faces of people he had lost, mistakes he had made, opportunities he had missed. And behind it all, the looming figure seemed to watch, waiting for him to break. "You are weak," the shadow whispered, its voice a low, gravelly sound. "You cannot escape your past. You cannot escape yourself." John's knees trembled, but he gritted his teeth and stood his ground. This was the trial. The creature, Cenax, was testing him, testing his strength, his will to survive. The fear was real, but it wasn't the darkness or the creature that would defeat him. It was himself, if he let it. The figure stepped closer, and John could feel its cold, suffocating presence. He wanted to run, to escape, but he knew there was no escape from this trial. There was no running from himself. He had to face his fear head-on. "You are nothing," the shadow hissed. "You will never defeat me. You will never be strong enough to overcome your fears." The words echoed in his mind, growing louder and louder until they almost drowned him. "But no," John fought, clenching his fists. "I won't let it control me. I won't let this thing win." With a sudden burst of energy, John pushed forward, stepping into the darkness. He didn't know what was ahead, but he couldn't let fear consume him. He wouldn't let the shadows define him. His heart raced as he took each step, facing the figure head-on, not knowing what would happen next. And then, as if breaking through a barrier, the shadows suddenly receded. The oppressive feeling lifted, and the air seemed to clear. The dark figure disappeared, and the room returned to its cold, metallic stillness. For a moment, John stood there, breathing heavily, heart racing. Had he won? Had he passed the test? "You have faced your fear," Cenax's voice rumbled from somewhere in the room. "But you have only just begun to understand your place in this world. Fear is your greatest enemy. And yet, it is the one thing that will make you stronger." John felt a rush of both relief and uncertainty. He had passed the test, but it had changed him. He wasn't the same person he had been when he arrived in this place. He had learned something about himself and his strength. But he still wasn't sure. Was he ready to accept Cenax's offer? Could he truly serve this being, knowing what it demanded in return? His mind was still filled with questions, but there was one thing he knew for certain now. He had faced the darkness, and he had come out the other side. Now, there was no turning back. The room remained eerily silent after the trial. John's breath came in sharp gasps as he tried to steady himself, still feeling the weight of what he had just endured. The shadows that had once surrounded him were now gone, but their presence lingered in his mind. He had faced his fear, but the cost of that victory was unknown. Cenax's voice echoed through the empty space, colder than ever before. "You have passed your test, human. But remember, this is only a small glimpse of what awaits you. The darkness, the fear, the power, all of it will be yours. But you must be willing to accept the price." John's pulse quickened. The price. What did Cenax mean by that? Was the power, the immortality, truly worth it? He had already seen how easily the creature could manipulate reality, bend the world to its will. Was this a trap? Or was there really a way for him to gain the strength he had always desired? "What price?" John asked, his voice steady, but with an edge of caution. He had made it this far, but the real test was about to begin. Cenax's figure emerged from the shadows, its glowing eyes fixated on John. "You seek power, human. You want immortality. But everything comes at a cost. You will serve me, not just with your body, but with your soul. I will take what is most precious to you, your humanity. In return, you will become something greater than you could ever imagine." John's stomach turned at the thought. His humanity. What did Cenax mean by that? Could he really give up the very essence of who he was for the promise of power? Cenax seemed to sense his hesitation. "Your humanity is weak. It is your greatest limitation. If you are to truly become powerful, you must cast it aside. I offer you immortality, but only if you surrender your ties to the mortal world. No more emotions. No more connections. No more regrets. You will be mine. Forever." The words hit John like a hammer. Could he truly give up everything that made him who he was? His emotions, his memories, the very things that defined him. The fear he had just faced, was that a glimpse of the price he would pay? He had been afraid of the shadows, of losing himself, but what if that fear was only a taste of what would happen if he accepted Synax's offer? "I cannot give up who I am," John said, his voice cracking. It felt impossible, absurd. How could anyone willingly surrender everything they were, even for power? Synax's eyes flashed with an unsettling light. "You do not understand, human. Your refusal will not change your fate. You are already in my grasp. Your fear, your desires, they are mine to control. But if you choose to fight, if you refuse to surrender, your suffering will only grow. The path ahead is not a choice. It is an inevitability." John felt his knees weaken, but he forced himself to stand tall. "No," he said, more firmly this time. "I won't let you take my soul. I'd rather die than become something like you." Synax's eyes darkened, and for the first time, John saw a flicker of true anger. The creature's towering form seemed to swell with power, its presence overwhelming. "You will regret this, human," it growled, its voice filled with dark promise. "You have no idea what you are defying. I will show you the consequences of your decision. You will be broken, and when I am done with you, there will be nothing left." John's heart raced as Synax moved closer, the temperature in the room dropping rapidly. He could feel the creature's power pressing against him, threatening to crush him under its weight. The fear that had been growing inside him returned in full force, but something within him refused to give in. He had made his choice. "If I must suffer, then so be it," John said, his voice steady despite the terror that gripped him. "But I will not serve you. I will fight." Synax's lips curled into a twisted smile. "You are brave, human, but you will soon learn that bravery will not save you." With a flick of its hand, Synax unleashed a blast of energy so intense that it felt like the very air was being torn apart. The force sent John crashing to the ground, his body aching from the sheer power that had been unleashed. But as he struggled to rise, the spark of defiance in his heart burned brighter than ever. Synax's laughter echoed in the cold, empty room. "Fight all you want. It will make no difference. You are mine." John knew one thing for sure now. The true battle had only just begun. "You said." John's body ached with the impact, but the searing pain only fueled his resolve. The blast from Synax had sent him crashing to the ground, his limbs feeling like they might snap from the force. His vision blurred, but through the haze, he could see the towering form of Synax standing above him. The creature's eyes glowed ominously, its presence like an oppressive storm cloud that threatened to consume everything. As he struggled to push himself up, John's mind raced. He had made his decision. He would not bow to Synax. The price of immortality, the price of power, was too high. His humanity was all he had left, and he wasn't going to lose it. "You think you can resist me?" Synax's voice echoed through the room, low and menacing. "You are nothing, human. Power means nothing if you cannot even accept the inevitable. You cannot defy what is already your fate." John's breath came in shallow gasps, but his hands clenched into fists, nails digging into his palms. "I refuse to let you control me. I'd rather die fighting than become your puppet," he spat, his voice defiant despite the overwhelming power that pressed down on him. Synax's glowing eyes narrowed as it watched John struggle to rise, a mixture of amusement and annoyance in its gaze. "Very well. If you will not submit, then I shall break you. I will crush every last ounce of resistance from you. Your spirit will be mine, whether you like it or not." The creature raised a hand, and the air around John seemed to shimmer with dark energy. Without warning, Synax sent another wave of power surging through the room, the force causing the ground beneath him to crack and tremble. John was thrown backward, his body slamming into the walls, the impact leaving him gasping for air. His mind was swimming, but he forced himself to stay conscious. This wasn't the end. He couldn't let it be the end. "You are weak, human," Synax said, its voice colder now, as if it were growing tired of the game. "You are nothing but a fleeting moment in time. You will fall like all the others." But as Synax spoke, something inside John stirred. The words, the threats, the crushing pressure, it all felt so overwhelming. Yet it ignited a spark in him. No, he thought, I'm not weak. I'm not just a moment in time. I am more than that. John closed his eyes, and in that moment, he drew on everything he had. His strength, his fear, his memories, and his defiance. He refused to let Synax's words define him. In the face of death, in the face of impossible odds, he realized one thing. It wasn't power that made a person strong. It was their will to fight, their determination to protect what mattered most, their refusal to be broken. With a shout, John pushed himself off the ground, his body aching, but his spirit stronger than ever. He focused every ounce of energy into a single desperate surge forward. Synax's eyes widened for a split second as John lunged toward it. The creature raised a hand, preparing to unleash its devastating power, but John was faster. He didn't have the strength or the speed of an immortal being, but he had something far more powerful: his will. He collided with Synax in a flash of light, a burst of raw energy surrounding them both. The impact caused the room to shake, the very fabric of reality seeming to crack under the force of their clash. Synax staggered back for the first time, its grip on the situation loosening. "You think this will save you?" Synax hissed, regaining its composure. "I don't need saving," John grunted through gritted teeth. "I just need to stop you." With a final surge of willpower, John reached into the heart of Synax's power, focusing everything he had on one goal: to break the creature's control over him. It was a gamble, but it was the only option he had left. Synax let out a roar of frustration as John's energy collided with its core. There was a blinding flash of light, and for a moment, everything went silent. The pressure in the room lifted. The darkness that had consumed them both seemed to recede. When John's vision cleared, Synax stood before him, but something had changed. The creature's once imposing presence seemed diminished, as if the very essence of its power had been fractured. Synax's form flickered, like a mirage, struggling to hold itself together. You should have submitted." Synax's voice was weak now, filled with disbelief. "You should have been mine." John stood tall, battered and bruised, but resolute. He had faced the impossible, the unthinkable, and had come out the other side stronger. Synax's power had faltered in the face of his defiance. "No one owns me," John said, his voice steady. "I am not yours to break." Synax's form trembled, the once powerful being now on the verge of collapse. And as the creature faltered, John knew the battle was far from over. But for the first time, he felt hope. He had fought back against the darkness, and in doing so, he had proven that no force in the universe, no matter how powerful, could control him. Synax's final words echoed through the air. "This is not the end. You cannot escape me. I will return." But John was ready. Whatever happened next, he had found his strength. He had found his will to survive, and he would never back down.